Shut down.
Okay, here we go.
So,
Okay, everybody, welcome to the East Point Movie Critic Discussion Night for December 1st, 2022. And we're discussing The Card Counter, Paul Schrader's 2021 movie that got an 87 on Rotten Tomatoes, 87% approval, but only 42% from the audiences. So I think we're probably going to be able to get into why that was the case. All right, a few things here. But, so first, everyone, if you have a phone, please mute it. I would appreciate that, so we don't have any. I already did mine, so we don't have any phones ringing in the middle. And okay, our next event will be January 26th. Because the end of the month is just too crazy with the holidays, so we're skipping the end of this month, and we'll go right to our normal fourth Thursday of the month, and that will start with January 26th. And I'll send an email in the next week or so as to what film that will be. In the meantime, by a show of hands is what we always do. We have some new people here, but we always do show of hands. Did you like the movie? Yes or no? Yes?
Yes.
please.
How about
Well, I'll get to the middle. Yeah. Okay, so just a few. Okay.
thoughtful?
And then how about so-so? People who think it was so-so, mixed?
Yeah.
I'm putting myself in that category, by the way.
So.
Okay, and then people who did not like it. Hands up. You did not like it?
My wife hated it.
Okay. Only one who hated it. I'm actually surprised. I thought there was going to be more, but okay.
They should be.
Okay.
My wife has insight.
Okay. All right. So the consensus from Rotten Tomatoes was, this was their words. Led by Oscar Isaac's gripping performance, The Card Counter adds another weighty chapter to Paul Schrader's long inquiry into man's moral responsibility. And I'll get into the history of Paul Schrader and how he has covered this territory many, many times before. Now, the audience's consensus, which again was only a 42%, was even with a great cast and respected director, the slow and dreary Card Counter adds up to a disappointing letdown. That sound fair?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I really can't take exception to that, and I can't take exception to the Rotten Tomatoes one either. I think they both are fair points. So the budget, I couldn't find what the actual production budget was, other than many sources said low budget, very low budget. There were 20 people who were listed as executive producers, which according to what I read on IMDb, the Internet Movie Database, was a record for a Hollywood movie to have 20 people listed as executive producers. It means they all gave some money or helped raise it. The box office returns internationally, 4.36 million, that's worldwide. About 2.66 was in the US and 1.7 international. But try to remember, this was made during COVID. Well, actually, they started shooting it in February of 2020, and then had a shutdown production for a couple of months. And then, and Paul Schrader was not happy about that at all. I'll give a quote that was kind of funny that he said about that, being forced to shut down. And then they only had 5 or 6 days of shooting to finish it. When they finally resumed a couple months later, they did it, and then it was done. And then, they did the post-production and editing. The cinematography, if you notice, had I thought it was a pretty fascinating look to it. Schrader likes a gritty look. He tends to be a minimalist, and I'll get to his influences in a minute. But the cinematographer, who I think helped convey his vision to the screen, is Alexander Dynan, who worked with him previously in 2017 on a movie called First Reformed, which I did not see, but also got pretty good reviews. You see that one? No. First Reformed, yeah. It's about a man of the cloth and something happens, and I think it was Ethan Hawke, if I remember right. And also the guy also shot 4 episodes of Billions, which is a TV show Ann and I love. So that was kind of interesting. The music.
It's weird.
I wanted to complain about the music, and so that one song, and I'll get into that in a bit too. But Robert Levon Bean, B-E-E-N, or Bean, I guess it probably is. He's the one who did with the vocals. I'm not familiar with him. He's in a group called Black Rebel Motorcycle Club, not on my radar. But his father, who passed away several years ago, was in the group The Call, which in the early 80s had several big hits, including a song called The Walls Came Down and Let the Day Begin. Two kind of, for MTV type generation, those were pretty big hits. So, and McCall was a fairly big group for a short period of time in the 80s. And that was his father, but I'm not familiar with him at all. Okay, so for anyone who liked the movie, can you talk a little bit about what you liked about it? Please go right ahead.
Well, some parts I had to hide my head. I mean, let me tell you that, but
Yep.
I was struck by how the movie was crafted. It was very dark, except for when they went into the City of Lights. But I was listening to the background music, which I generally hate that kind of music. But I was listening to the lyrics, and at one point, when they were in the casino towards the end,
Mhm.
they were singing a song called "You Were the Beast I Was Raised On."
Mhm.
And it is about lonesome education. And when I heard the lyrics, it kind of put everything together. But I liked how it was constructed, because at the very beginning of the movie, am I talking too much?
No, go right ahead.
At the very beginning of the movie, he sets us up. He's in the prison, and he said that he likes routine, and
He likes being in prison.
yes, but before that, he said, he started out saying, "I never thought I would be in prison. I never."
And it's very hard to hear the people talking.
A little more.
Sheila, it's Chloe. I'll talk louder. It was how he was transformed and became this beast and couldn't get rid of this beast, even wrapping the room in that.
But
Just-
I didn't
The
get
sheets,
that. Was somebody explain?
Yeah, I'll get into
why?
that. I'll get into that. I've got, because I had to research that.
Took a while.
I only got a little bit of it as my guessing as to what it was, and then I read
Okay.
stuff and it made more sense. So I'll
Okay,
catch you
good.
up on that.
Good, good.
Okay.
But long and
Sorry for
short,
interrupting.
no, that's okay. You have to do it with me. But the thing that I liked was that it did get all wrapped up, and we understood that he may not have started out as this beast, but it was something that he could never get rid of.
Right.
And that to me, I just thought it was constructed well.
But he was trying to atone
Yeah.
for what he had done
Right.
to this young man.
Yeah.
And
Right. He was trying to use Kurt with the C as kind of a chance at redemption of himself by helping this kid.
And you
Alright.
know, that is kind of a play on Kirk, which means church. And here it was Kirk with a C, so it was skewed even
more.
there.
I want to raise a question about that issue. It appeared that he was trying to be a father figure for Kirk and to help him out.
Right.
Is that really true, or was he in fact using him for his ultimate goal? I think he was not the parent figure. I think he had an evil goal to use Kirk and C.
Well, what was his,
No, I
what do you
don't
think,
think it's
what do you
evil.
think was the evil goal? I'm curious.
Redemption. At the end, he still wanted to have revenge against the major.
Well, wait a minute,
Yeah.
but hang on, I think he only wanted to have revenge against the major for killing Kurt, because he was trying to talk Kurt out of his plan to try to get revenge on the major.
And he gave him all that money. I think he gave him all that money because he knew at the end he was gonna be in prison and wouldn't be able to use the money. So
no, he was
gave
trying
him
to
like-
give a life. He was
Yeah.
trying to save
Yeah.
a soul. He wanted it for his own redemption. He was
That's
saving
fair.
a soul.
Yeah. No, I don't think he knew he was gonna be in prison, and I'll get to that too, because he didn't plan initially on wanting to kill Gordo.
I thought
That
he
was
would have
a-
that plan in
that was
mind when
only
he gave him the
because-
money because Why would he give all that money away?
Because he can make it back at any
He's gonna
time.
make it back.
Yeah, he didn't have a problem with that.
So
No,
where
but
did,
he
where did
was-
Kirk's
He was
mother live?
making the money for
In
sure.
like Portland or Seattle or something way out west.
Northwest.
Yeah.
And was that the same house that the major lived in?
No, the major was
No.
somewhere in central part of America, and it was I guess on the way relatively. So it was Illinois, I forget the name of where it was. Michigan,
But
something
in
like
his
that.
release, he was carrying torture.
Yes,
Why?
to intimidate Kirk.
You think? Or did he
Yeah.
always plan on going to get Gordo?
Okay, you can raise the question, and it's a fair question.
Yeah.
I think he didn't get rid of it because he still couldn't get rid of his past, so he kept it, but he felt this was a time to use it to intimidate Kirk into doing, quote, the right thing, going to make amends with your mother, that kind of thing. That's the way I chose to look at it. I think you can make a case for some other things.
Well, he was carrying the release before he ever met Kurt.
Yes, he was. He kept it with him. Remember, he really didn't live anywhere. He was on the road the whole time,
When
so
he first went into the
And he never
motel.
changed his clothing either.
it was all pretty much, I'll get to that too.
He only had those sheets in his suitcase.
It's all pretty much gray and black, right?
Black and gray.
So let's bring
And I'm
up,
gonna put this up on the screen so they can see it too.
let's bring up the wrapping of the furniture at this point.
Well, one second on that, because there's other stuff I want to get to, but I'll cover it. So here, it's a little harder to see. Oh, there you go. Now you can see it. So you can see, this is kind of his standard uniform. He was almost always in gray, sometimes with some black trim.
But he never changed his clothes.
He did, but
He took his shirt was open, it's the
Yeah.
same gray shirt.
it was a gray undershirt too.
Everything was gray.
So now, unfortunately, the colors didn't come out as vibrant on this as I'd like it to, but I'm gonna pass this around so you can see. Oh, it actually looks better here. I don't know if you can see. In this is an older movie that when I was in high school, I actually reviewed, called Hardcore, that Schrader made. And it's about a girl who runs away and gets caught up in the porn world. And it's the girl who's if you can see they almost have a puritanical look to the father played by George C. Scott and the girl, except if you notice what she's wearing under the puritanical type frock, it's all red. All red. And unfortunately, my printer didn't do justice to it because it's bright red. And that was part of the thing I actually wrote a paper on the color, the use of colors that he has. So the point is that she has a bland looking exterior, but underneath it is red trying to come out. And she ended up, working in the porn industry, and the father went through hell trying to get her back. That was what the movie was about, because he was very puritanical in how he raised her. Now, interestingly, and this is where I want to get to Paul Schrader, his parents were strict Calvinists. He was not allowed to see a movie until he was 18. He went to Calvin College and then Columbia University and then the UCLA graduate film program. So his influences, as he has stated, and he even wrote a book, was the minimalist French director Robert Bresson, who did Diary of a Country Priest, A Man Escaped, which was in 1956. And basically there's a lot of, that character in the lead, and I didn't see the movie, I read about it. If I did, it was ages ago, but it was about a prisoner who has a routine every day and writes in a diary. Sound familiar, right? And he takes comfort in the same routine. But he did escape. That was a little difference from Schrader's thing. Another of his bigger movies, this is Robert Bresson, was Oh Hazard Balthazar, a 1906 movie about a donkey who had, quote, impassioned eyes and was being abused by different masters and silently bearing his burden. Does that sound familiar too, though, with the character of Oscar Isaac's William Tell, which is another thing, William Tell, and where we go with that. Pickpocket was another movie where the protagonist narrates his diary. And according to Bresson's films, most of the time, the actors are not supposed to use emotion. It's supposed to be, quote, dry, unemotional monologues, and his films show that violence is senseless. His other two big influences was a Japanese director who made movies in the 30s through 1960. I'm going to mess up the name. Yasuhiro Ozu, who did precise compositions, contemplative pacing, low camera angles, elliptical storytelling, and melancholy in everyday existence. And then one more, a Danish director, Carl Theodor Dreyer. And I did hear of his big movie, The Passion of Joan of Arc from 1928, which I actually saw a long time ago, but he focused on emotional austerity, slow, stately pacing, themes of social intolerance, how fate and death are intertwined, and the power of evil. Again, so you can see how all these influenced Schrader. And he wrote a book on the three of them called The Transcendental Style in Film. He started as a film critic, and then he wrote screenplays, and he hit the jackpot when Martin Scorsese agreed to direct his big one. Anyone know what it is? Taxi Driver, right. So he wrote that, and he said he wrote it in the early 70s. It was made in 1976, but he wrote it during a, quote, bout of drinking and depression. So his other movies that he worked on with Martin Scorsese was Raging Bull. He wrote that with him. The Last Temptation of Christ and Bringing Out the Dead. And then his other movies that he wrote, American Gigolo, with Richard Gere, The Mosquito Coast with Harrison Ford. There's a few others. And he worked a lot with Willem Dafoe, who played Gordo here. I think at least 4 movies, maybe 5, he had Willem Dafoe in, including Light Sleeper. And Obsession, Affliction, First Reformed, with Ethan Hawke and Amanda Seyfried. The story of a Protestant minister serving as the pastor of a dwindling church and struggling with his fate. Blue Collar, which I think I also reviewed when I was in high school. That was his directorial debut. It starred Richard Pryor and Harvey Keitel, and it was a critique of union practices, and it says, in a raw depiction of the working class, somewhat lightened by Richard Pryor's comedic sensibilities. I'm going to disagree with that a little because I didn't think the humor in that movie really worked so well.
There wasn't much humor.
In Blue Collar.
Oh, yeah.
But the point was, he was using Richard Pryor, big famous comedian Richard Pryor, in a straight role, pretty much a straight role in Blue Collar. Here, he had Tiffany Haddish, who's famous as a comedian. She happens to be a huge Paul Schrader fan, so she ended up in this movie, and she originally tried playing it for laughs, and he's like, no, you got to do it straight. So that changed, but so that was kind of interesting. And then, of course, The Last Temptation of Christ, very controversial movie. Raging Bull, one of the most critically acclaimed movies ever. He wrote with Scorsese, and of course, Taxi Driver, also very, very highly acclaimed. And then movies he directed, besides First Reformed and Gigolo and Blue Collar. What was it? One that I never even heard of. It got a lot of good reviews. Mishima, A Life in 4 Chapters from 1985. The story follows the life and tragic demise of a controversial Japanese author using black and white and color. Autofocus. Now, Autofocus, I remember. Greg Kinnear played Bob Crane. You remember Hogan's Heroes? Okay. So Bob Crane, who was the star of Hogan's Heroes, in real life, had a sex obsession and ended up befriending a sleazy guy named John Henry Carpenter, who was played by Willem Dafoe, okay? And the two of them, it says, sink into a carnal abyss as Carpenter introduces the Bob Crane to the vile lifestyle of covertly documenting their sex conquests. So that was that. Affliction with Nick Nolte was another one. Cat People, he directed with Nastasha Kinski, Malcolm McDowell, and a Hardcore, the one I mentioned, and Light Sleeper, and this one. So, okay, now I know you wanted to get to some of the questions. Let me cover that, because you had some good questions as far as the wrapping of the furniture. That's the ending. I don't want to do that. I just have to find it. That's the problem. Okay, is this it? 1 second. Okay. Well, here they mention it, but they don't. I think it's the next page. That's the hard part, is finding everything. Yes. Okay. Here we go. All right. They talk about tells ascetic life is exacerbated by a strange ritual he conducts every time he gets to a new motel, which itself is heightened by the intense solemnity of his performance, which I thought was a good way to phrase it. Intense solemnity. When entering the room, he works his way around every piece of furniture except the bed, wraps them in sheets, securing them tightly. It's a bizarre habit that isn't explicitly explained in the film. However, the movie gives enough context about who he is to gather some possible reasons for it. The first and most simple is that he's hiding his fingerprints. I thought of that, maybe.
Yes.
He carries deep shame about who he is and what he did in his past, preferring that no one gets to know him to the point of near paranoia. It may be a reflexive and irrational act, but it makes sense that he wouldn't want to leave any trace of himself or his identity behind. There are other reasons too. The film opens with his monologue and he explains he never expected to find himself in prison despite ending up there. But he was surprised to find that he gained a certain peace from it. The certainty, the strict routine, the starkness, the relative isolation, and the blandness were soothing to him. The card counter doesn't pull any punches with his Abu Ghraib flashbacks, filming it with a distorted fisheye GoPro effect and taking pains to show the constantly flashing lights, the blaring, pounding, heavy metal music that screamed through the prison and didn't allow the prisoners or the guards to sleep. It was a time that scarred him as badly as the prisoners he dealt with, and thus his current life is all about trying to maintain that neutral blankness, not just in his routine, but also his surroundings. Casinos are also notoriously loud and chaotic, so he maintains his peace of mind by making his motel room as blank a canvas as possible. So there was another explanation.
Why the card player? I mean, that's how it starts off. Why the card player?
Because when he was in prison, he learned to count cards. He had a pass with that.
Okay.
And when he learned to card count, he said, "Oh, yeah, maybe I can actually make money from this,"
Yes.
which he realized he could.
Yes.
So
The other point is he didn't want to be in a hotel room in the casino. He wanted a nondescript place far away.
He wanted to be anonymous.
Anonymous.
exactly,
And
which
he
is another
also-
reason for the colors of it. He's always wearing the gray, I think.
And he also
To be
wanted to
anonymous.
avoid the cameras. in the
Yes,
casino.
exactly.
And
So
that's
it's not-
why he also played under the wire.
Yeah, the low amounts. He wins
He
750
wins
and
money,
leave.
but he doesn't win a lot. He
Right.
plays, but
Yeah,
doesn't
that's
play a
But
lot.
he played for big money when he joined
Only
the
at the
poker.
end.
No,
When
for poker,
when
which is
Tiffany
not-
Haddish convinced him to be
Right.
staged to do that.
Because there's no card counting in poker.
But he
Nope.
was also good at
Justin,
poker.
yeah, he was, well, apparently, yeah, he was, but he played more poker in this movie than blackjack, which I thought was odd.
For a
given the
movie
name.
called The Card Counter.
Right,
Yeah,
right.
some critics noted that too.
Right,
Right.
and then just to switch a little bit, because you mentioned it before, Ed, which was what, the name for a gambler is pretty funny, right? William Tell, you know.
You want to talk about the tell part?
Yeah, like, I mean, when I think of that, I hated the movie, okay, but I thought that there were elements of it that could have been interesting, like I find movies about gambling interesting. I never saw a movie about Abu Ghraib, but there's something interesting about that. I don't know what I don't know why they had to connect those two things, why he became a gambler. Well, I guess that's the only way, yeah, I know, but that's.
Well, also, when you go into a casino, you're anonymous. Nobody knows you.
Right.
So you can do that. And he actually got uncomfortable when that,
And they know.
when the one guy recognized him.
Oh, yeah.
But he did go with him to the other casino just to check it out.
Yeah.
But yeah, he got a little uncomfortable when that, I forget the character's name.
Other than the word tell, which in gambling means you give away something by your body language or
Right.
something about your hand.
Yes,
Was there something else about William Tell? what is that?
there is. And I'll get to that in a minute.
William
But
Tell
Oh,
fought
okay,
against-
I'd like to know.
fought against, he rebelled against the tyranny, and he was the first person to be leading this charge. He was from Switzerland,
Right,
and he was the one who started this rebellion
And
right.
he shot the
in a bizarre
Yes.
kind of way.
He was also a sharpshooter with an arrow, right?
Oh,
But
okay.
you know, with the poker, there's a line in that movie that says it was very still, and in poker, it wasn't counting the cards, it was waiting. And there were a couple lines in that movie that said, "Weight accrues from past actions."
Right, that's
So,
right.
so that's why I think it was
right.
Puffer was.
But weight as in W-E-I-G-H-T, not W-A-I-T.
Yes.
Right, okay. A little bit more on the wrapping of the furniture. There's another line here. The card counter explores an aspect rarely explored in Hollywood, not portraying the soldier as a hero, but how war makes monsters of all of us. As with much of Schrader's work, the card counter presents an interesting and difficult story about a man with a number of sins upon his soul. Bill's continued all-consuming guilt about his past is clear throughout the card counter, and it could be that by confining himself to cheap motel rooms rendered sterile and anonymous by white sheets, he's attempting to reenact his prison experience as a way to keep punishing himself. While certainly a darker take, this concept would seem to be supported by the subtle, strong performance from Oscar Isaac, who embodies a man so consumed by his past that he seems doomed never to escape it.
It looks like a pretty dark cast.
Yeah.
Yeah. He
But
also
you
did
don't
his,
think he was all bad?
Like it says, like his sheet wrap furniture reveals, that part isn't as far from his mind in the card counter as he likes to believe.
he also stored the phone in the room and other things.
He
So that,
took everything away.
yeah, he took
He made
everything away.
So there was nothing there.
Yeah.
My take on the wrapping was
Watch it.
totally
So he
different.
sneaked everything
I thought
away.
that the both of them
Yeah.
were both rapping. It showed the scenes of Abu Ghraib as so filthy and disgusting.
Yep.
I thought this was their way of sort of cleaning up their act.
I'm glad you said that, because when I was watching it, I had that thought too, that like this is an environment he can control to be clean as a
Exactly.
way to help heal himself from the past.
And that was when I said bring it up earlier, we were having a discussion about him keeping the torture tools
Yes,
to follow.
Yes.
And that would be directly in opposition to my take on, rapping. And one way you're getting away from it, and
Yes.
on the other hand, you're still.
because he can't quite get away from it, right? Okay. So I have some stuff now. Are you guys familiar with, were you familiar with Paul Schrader before seeing this movie?
No.
But when I named all those movies,
Yeah.
you know pretty much most of them, right?
A good resume.
Pretty good resume, right, exactly. Okay, I just wanted to get to Oscar Isaac. Were you familiar with Oscar Isaac before?
No.
All right, wait till you hear this. Because this is, so Oscar Isaac went to Miami-Dade College, then Juilliard for his Bachelor of Fine Arts. He was named by Vanity Fair in 2017 as the best actor of his generation. And in the New York Times in 2020, he was named as one of the 25 greatest actors in the 21st century.
Wow.
He's won Golden Globe and National Board of Review Awards. And according to, I think this was Wikipedia, if you watched the movie in the past 7 years, oh, this is IMDb, you'll likely know Hollywood's Oscar Isaac. His full name is Oscar Isaac Hernandez Estrada. He played Poe from the Star Wars sequel trilogy, the pilot.
He
Oh.
looked familiar.
Oh, yeah, you've seen him. He's been in X-Men Apocalypse, Ex Machina, Operation Finale, where he plays an Israeli secret agent who kidnaps Adolf Eichmann to stand trial. He was also in Dune, lots of other things as well. And he was on a TV series that I couldn't find the name of, but it was based on the Philip Roth book where Lindbergh becomes president or runs for president. I can't remember the name of the show, but so he was the father of the family at the center of that. It was on HBO. It was a mini series, like 8 episodes or something. He was good in that too. Okay. So now Tiffany Haddish, she's famous for Girls Trip and the Carmichael Show. Long career in comedies and sitcoms, and doing voice work as well. And by the way, I didn't buy the romantic relationship with the two of them at all. I thought it was very, very great. It just didn't come
And at the
across
most
as,
unromantic.
yeah, just didn't come
The
across.
ending was
as-
a little silly. It's like
alright.
an ET ending.
Yeah, right. And now, and Ty Sheridan, who played Kirk, the kid, I was trying to think where I've seen him before. I did see Steven Spielberg's Ready Player One. He was the star of that, which was actually a pretty good gaming type movie, but there was more to it than that. He also played Cyclops in the newer generation of X-Men cast. I'm not big into X-Men, so I don't know about that. And then Willem Dafoe, Spider-Man, the Green Goblin. He was in Platoon, Aquaman. He played Jesus in The Last Temptation of Christ. He had another time he worked with Paul Schrader. Let's see. And, okay, yeah, that's pretty much it there. So I had notes when I was watching it about the name William Tillich or Tillich. And I'll get to, there's something I have in the name on that in a minute, but I'll get to it. So he gambles and wins $750, and then he notices that the pit boss or one of the security guys is starting to eye him a little, and that's when he packs up and leaves.
Right.
So he leaves before getting kicked out, but he knows how far to go because he's obviously been kicked out before, which he references when Tiffany Haddish was kind of interviewing her Linda character. He stays at a $56 a night motel, and I noticed where he was. He wasn't in any of the big cities. He was in Atlantic City, but he was right outside St. Louis. He was on the Mississippi River, the casinos, the smaller ones, not the real big glitzy ones. Oh, Slippery Joe was the friend he met in the casino, the guy who recognized him. And that was actually played by a guy who's normally a stuntman, Bobby C. King. And I was disappointed he didn't come back. He was kind of a fun character. He was just in the one scene, then he's gone. So he had the torture nightmare from being a prison guard, which was apparently back in 2003. And it shows how the guards were, in a psychological sense, also being tortured. Now, you remember he picks a fight when he's in prison. They showed the flashback with a large prisoner. And he contemplated having him, quote, finish the job, unquote. So there's obviously major unresolved issues that he was actually trying maybe to get himself killed, potentially. And later we see him visit Leavenworth Prison, and it was clear he missed it. Right? You know, he wanted to give the Kirk the little tour of the place. He's like, I don't want to tour this.
He was,
Right.
yeah.
Right. He had
When
no
people
life.
are institutionalized, they become comfortable.
I made a note on the music. So the music with the lyrics, the Robert Levon Bean, I wrote it was whiny and annoying to me. And I noted that a critic, Glenn Kenny, who I've read many times, he writes sometimes in the New York Times, but he wrote somewhere else, but he wrote calling the music keening, which I thought was a good description, and defined as prolonged and high-pitched, typically expressing grief or sorrow. Okay, do you remember they talked about SEER when they were at the convention in Atlantic City with Gordo speaking? He had up on his board, SERE, Survival, Evasion, Resistance, and Escape, which I thought kind of maybe encapsulates the issues Tell has as well. He wanted to help Kirk, his prison guard father, committed suicide. He sees the young version of himself in Kirk, uses the threat of his prison guard techniques to scare him to see his mother, and bribes him with $150,000. Tell never cared about the World Series of Poker. He noted he's not a fan of celebrity poker. He even refused $10,000 to wear a sponsor's t-shirt. Remember that? So he really did like being anonymous. But he walked out of the World Series of Poker to go and get Gordo. And he reenacts apparently a torture sequence. Now, we never see Kirk get killed. We just see it on the news, or see him watching it about it on the news. And we never see him kill Gordo. We hear stuff, and then he walks out covered in blood, and that was it. And then he gets 8.5 years in Leavenworth.
Who killed Kirk?
Gordo, for breaking into his house.
But he himself was tortured.
Yes.
In that same scene where he's killing Gordo and which we don't see.
That's the assumption, that they tortured each other, maybe, but he said he was going first. That may have been
So he
last.
tortured himself.
No, I think he was torturing Gordo, and I don't know if he survived it. I don't know, but
Well,
he
when
did
he
get bloody,
walked
but I
out
don't
of
know if it
that
was his
room.
blood or, you know.
He didn't look so well coming out.
No, he didn't look totally great, right. Something happened, right? He put up some sort of a fight.
We're never going to know.
I also didn't completely buy that Gordo would go into that room willingly without trying to move on him.
Right.
They were pretty close. He was obviously highly trained, so I didn't kind of buy that either. Now the ending.
Wait,
Sure, go right ahead.
okay, so you know when Gordo gets home, he opens his door, he walks in, and then I noticed that everything
It
was
was covered.
white,
Yeah,
everything was covered, wrapped.
Mhm.
Right.
Yes, yes, because he was intending to commit a crime, and he didn't want the blood everywhere, and he didn't want the fingerprints.
So
And
he covered it.
I believe he covered it, absolutely. When he got in waiting for him to show up. That was my take. Yeah. Okay, you want to talk about the ending now, or you want to wait a little? Like, I've got other stuff.
One second,
Sure.
why didn't Kirk go directly to see his mother?
He didn't want
He
to.
had no
He
intention.
wanted to kill Gordo.
His plan was to get revenge on Gordo. That's what he wanted to
He
do.
didn't care about
He
the
was
money.
willing to
He
risk
didn't
his
care
life.
about school. He didn't care about anything but killing that man.
Yeah.
But he took the money,
Yeah,
and he took the threat seriously,
Yes,
and he called
Yes.
his mother.
yes.
He did. And he
But
went and killed
while
the
being
guy.
threatened, he called his mother.
Because he really didn't intend to go through with it.
Yeah.
He was killing that guy and that was what was in his
And was
head.
that Tell's plan?
No,
No.
had nothing to do with Tell.
Tell misread his
Tell wanted him
intent.
to go straight and narrow.
Yes,
Go to college, here's all your money to pay off your debts, here's money for school.
Yeah, I don't know. how
But
you
he
got
had it in his head to kill the guy, and that's what he was gonna do, but the guy killed him first.
right. Because he was an amateur. He wasn't trained like Gordo was.
That's what he
Well,
told
that's
him
what he
happened.
said in the beginning, you're not thinking it through.
Right,
You haven't thought it through well enough.
correct, correct. All right, so you want to talk about the ending a little?
sure.
Okay, so the very last scene,
Yeah,
Buddy.
Lolinda comes back to him
yeah,
in the prison to visit.
right.
Were you surprised by that or not?
No.
I wasn't either. So, and then the fingers touching, the long shot they held for, while they were rolling the credits and everything.
Uh-huh.
So, and the song lyrics were, "You just need someone to carry you home." Those were the song lyrics while that was going on. Now I gotta find the part about the ending. I mentioned, we've got a whole thing on the ending. It's really about.
When you read these interpretations, who's doing this? Who's in, the interpretations, is this a critic or a?
Good
producer or
question.
what?
Sometimes it comes from Critic, sometimes it comes from an interview with Schrader. So there's some of that as well, because he did talk about it.
Was it, in the beginning, like, we were a little late, so was there a real point to the movie? What was the overrun, like, what's the real, was there?
Well, it was a movie against
Abu Ghraib.
against
And that's
torture.
Torture. And the world considers that not acceptable.
Okay,
And you don't expect your enemy. to
Yeah,
do
it was
that
an
to you.
anti-violence movie,
Oh,
for one
okay.
thing.
And should be prosecuted for.
okay.
But isn't it also
Oh,
about
here we go. Here we go.
forgiveness, trying to find
Here it is.
forgiveness so in what you've done, so you can
It's about
really.
A lot of it's about
and
guilt.
Yeah.
Well, I think, forgiving yourself,
It's
maybe,
first.
right? In trying to do that, which he was unsuccessful at, I believe.
Yeah, I think so. I mean,
What you find out is you can only do what you want to do. You can't make somebody else do it.
Right, you can't make somebody else do it. Good point, good point. All
Well,
right,
it
so the
was
meaning
pretty-
of the final scene, and this was from Screen Rant.
Normal.
After the terrible final climax in which Bill sees a news report that Kirk has been shot and killed by Gordo, prompting him to go to Gordo's house and torture the former major, ultimately killing him, he turns himself into the police. He's back in prison, this time for murder. Final scene shows Tiffany Haddish's character, Lolinda, coming to visit him. Here, this writer wrote, "It's something of a surprise," but we didn't think so. They did. They had started up romance, but he left her high and dry, not only walking out on his poker tournament, but also walking out on her, all to kill a man violently, which to me just meant he hit tilt, right? He was talking about hitting tilt.
Mhm.
Oh, he.
He himself hit tilt when the guy killed his protege. Okay, so the ending with the fingertips, it suggests Lolinda has forgiven him because she understands the darkness. She knew virtually nothing about him, only that he had a lot of baggage in his past, some of it that might be quite dark. But Bill's murder of Gordo was sure to have been all over the news, along with his sordid background in Gordo's role in Abu Ghraib and subsequent escape from consequence, as well as Kirk's story. It's horrific and tragic, but Lolinda's understanding smile and gesture to Bill seems to indicate that she now knows his full story and understands why he did what he did. It's also symbolic as a counterexample of a concept Bill explained to Kirk earlier in the movie, tilt. It's a term from poker to describe a player who gets upset or emotionally rattled during a game and as such, lets those emotions get the better of them, adopting a foolish strategy that often involves playing in an overly aggressive way. As Bill has shown, maintaining a poker face at all times is key to winning. The card counter isn't exactly subtle in indicating it's an analogy for Kirk's emotional state and his plan for delivering justice to Gordo. But since Kirk has come into Bill's life, Bill has also been tilted in ways. He spends years trying to keep equilibrium in his life, able to keep his demons at bay through the perfect balance of his routine. His life ever since being released from military prison has been an attempt to try to recreate the regimented setting of prison as well as the peace. The final shot in the movie in which Lolinda's and Bill's fingers are in perfect symmetry is symbolic of the balance he has regained now that he's back in prison. He has finally confronted his past, even if only in the most violent way, and has finally accepted that he's happier in prison than in the outside world, as there's no danger of his pristine equilibrium being upended.
You know, in the first, the scene
Joel.
where you first see him in prison,
Right.
at the end.
Yep.
He says something to the effect that he finds comfort in this environment.
Peace.
Yeah.
Peace and
Peace.
comfort.
Right.
And, you know, getting back
Think
to
about
like.
it, what kind of life could he live? Couldn't live. He's haunted.
Right.
And
Yes,
tilting is
that's
the
right.
ultimate tell
Right.
in gambling. That would be the ultimate tell.
Exactly. Okay, so I have some trivia notes about the movie that I thought were kind of interesting.
Before you go there, what was the significance of him telling Kurt that I'm not gonna have sexual intercourse until you see your mother? And then he thinks he went to see his mother, he goes back and he has intercourse. What do the critics say is the significance of that? I mean, what's the purpose of that whole
They don't care about that.
thing?
It kind of was glossed over from the reviews I read.
Nobody said anything about that.
No, but he kept his part of the deal, I think was the point. He was a rigid man and he made a deal, so he kept his part of it.
And sex was so out of this movie.
Yeah.
So,
Nothing about sex.
so interestingly enough, the character that was supposed to play Kurt was Shia LaBeouf, but he dropped off the project because of scheduling conflicts. And the reason they got Ty Sheridan to play him was Nicolas Cage, the actor, who's a close friend of Paul Schrader, recommended him because he collaborated with him on the movie Joe from 2013. Now, because it says also, because the film's budget was so low, there were really only 1 or 2 takes for every scene. Oscar Isaac found this to be both challenging and very refreshing. So it says, with 5 days remaining, they had to stop shooting on March 16th, 2020. Oh, here's director's quote. Director Paul Schrader was furious, calling the producers, quote, pussified, unquote, in a Facebook post and said he would have shot through hell, fire, rain to finish filming. To prep for his part, Oscar Isaac not only met with professional card players, but also took a course in penmanship. His character writes longhand in his diary every night. Paul Schrader tracked down former inmates of Leavenworth on Facebook to find out what it was like in the Army prison. Okay, now this is another interesting side bit about the wrapping of the furniture. The motivations for why it was done were never explained. However, when Paul Schrader made the movie Cat People, his production designer, Ferdinando Scarfiotti, did exactly the same thing, as he was so offended by the blandness of American motels and their interior decor. So he saw it somewhere else and appropriated it for his script. Then it says here about tilt being a poker term for a state of mental or emotional confusion. A player adopts a less than optimal strategy, usually resulting in them becoming overly aggressive. It's closely associated with another poker term, steam. I'm not familiar with that one, but it says placing an opponent on tilt or dealing with being on tilt oneself is an important aspect of poker. It's relatively frequent occurrence due to frustration, animosity against other players, or simply bad luck. Oscar Isaac has admitted in interviews he didn't really understand the screenplay the first time he read it. He was able to make more sense of it after a few more readings. Okay, produced by Martin Scorsese, who collaborated in 2 of his most famous films with Schrader, Taxi Driver and Raging Bull, and I'll call it The Last Temptation of Christ. The first motel room we see Bill check into, the room number was 101, and I did not remember this. That's the room number of the notorious torture chamber in George Orwell's 1984. Okay. Now here, you were talking about the name Tell, where that comes from. Okay, it's a reference to a Swiss folk hero. According to the legend, William Tell was an expert marksman with a crossbow who assassinated,
William Tell Overture.
right, but he assassinated Albrecht Gessler, a tyrannical reeve of the Austrian dukes of the House of Habsburg, positioned in Altdorf.
He got his revenge.
Right. His defiance and tyrannicide encouraged the population to open rebellion. According to the director and writer Schrader, William Tell's name is also a reference to the eponymous poker term tell, which is a change in a player's behavior and demeanor, particularly if the tell is unconscious and reliable. Sometimes the player may fake a tell, hoping to induce their opponents to make poor judgments in response to the false tell. More often, people try to avoid giving out a tell by maintaining a poker face, regardless of how strong or weak their hand is. Now, this is interesting. One of former President Barack Obama's 14 favorite films of 2021 was this movie.
Don't tell me it was.
Favorite film of Obama.
Was this movie ever released?
Yeah,
in
it
theaters?
is.
Oh, yeah. No, it did about 4.5 million at the box office,
Oh, really?
2.66 in America and 1.7 something in international.
Because if it was done during COVID and everything.
They went
Yeah.
to it by accident.
It couldn't do a big box office because of that.
Yeah, where
They
do you
thought
go
they
to-
were going for an
where do you see that during
entertainment.
Yeah.
Wasn't on Netflix.
Now, also, his real name, William Tell's real name, Tillich, might be a reference to Paul Tillich, a German-American Christian existentialist philosopher and Lutheran Protestant theologian, who's widely regarded as one of the most influential theologians of the 20th century. He's known for his works, The Courage to Be and The Dynamics of Faith, which introduced issues of theologically and culture to a general readership. He's best known for his major 3-volume work in academic theology called Systematic Theology, in which he developed his method of correlation, an approach that explores the symbols of Christian revelation as answers to the problems of human existence raised by contemporary existential analysis. Okay. Yeah, that was a lot, right?
I think revenge fits better.
Yeah, right, good point.
He wasn't Christian. Isaac.
Oscar
His
Isaac,
parents.
William
were
Tell.
Mormon.
Oh, Oscar Isaac's character? I know his person himself.
Yeah.
I don't know.
He was Mormon.
Oscar
His
Isaac's Mormon?
parents were.
Oscar Isaac's parents were Mormon? I didn't know that. Interesting, all right. Well, he's an actor, it's okay.
That explains a lot.
Cahiers de Cinema Annual Top 10 Film Award, this was listed as number 9. Sight and Sounds, the best 50 films of 2021, this was listed as number 33. Oh, the tattoo on his back.
Yes.
Remember what
He
it
had a
said?
couple of them.
Well, there was one huge one. It said, I trust my life to providence, I trust my soul to grace. Okay, make of it what you will. So now it says, this is, I thought was interesting. Like his previous film, First Reformed, this Paul Schrader film has many parallels to Taxi Driver. The film and Taxi Driver have recurring shots of their male protagonists lying alone in a single bed, emphasizing their solitude. In Taxi Driver, the protagonist, which was played by Robert De Niro, Travis Bickle, tries to persuade a child prostitute, played by Jodie Foster, to run away from her pimp and return to her parents, right? When this attempt fails, he responds with an act of bloody violence. Again, sound familiar, right? That's against the pimp and his entourage. In this film, the protagonist tries to persuade a young man, Kurt, to reconcile with his mother, and when this fails, he responds with an act of bloody violence against Cordell.
So he's consistent.
Consistency, that's what-
That's about it.
All right. So there were some interesting reviews, and what the critics said, like the negative stuff. I wanted to cover that for you. Where's the negatives? Okay, here we go. So Susan Granger, who's a syndicated critic who I actually know because I attended many events with her in Connecticut. She wrote, the movie was desolate, depraved, and depressing drama. Deal me out. There she goes. Tell and Kirk are both solitary, disaffected loners, never revealing their tormentor intentions. For them, is redemption even possible? The question is never answered by director, screenwriter Schrader, although his dirge runs an agonizing 1 hour and 50 minutes. In Boston Globe, Mark Feeney wrote, yes, life is a prison, life is a casino. It is not, however, a movie, or at least not the card counter. Hannah Flint in Time Out wrote, for all its moody moralizing, the card counter is a slow burn bluff with little new to offer.
By the way, nobody mentions how slow it was in the beginning.
Yes, I fell asleep.
Some of the reviews did.
Yeah, not just the beginning is right.
Whoa.
Right.
There were others, there were other
This is the
positive
beginning.
ones. Now, this was interesting.
Anyone understanding, even have any understanding?
There were two reviewers who are in NPR in Los Angeles. Peter Rayner wrote, rather schematic. Oscar Isaac, for me, the performance was a little bit too reined in. Now, this is interesting. The same NPR station in Los Angeles, KPCC, Christy Lemire wrote, Oscar Isaac is tremendous as always. I didn't love it, meaning the film, and I really wanted to.
Well, I thought he was terrific too. Like I said before, I hated the movie, but he was terrific, and nobody has a better poker face than him. He was, he was terrific.
Right.
All the way through.
Exactly.
Right.
The whole movie, he was a poker face, Unlike Mr. USA, who was, what the heck was that all about,
That was the only levity in the whole thing.
Right. Okay, so I was mentioning to you before the critic Glenn Kenny, who writes in the New York Times a lot. He did the review of this film for RogerEbert.com. So he wrote, as characters who profoundly affect the man's life, he talks about Tiffany Haddish and Ty Sheridan, meaning Linda and Kirk. It's neither a greatest hits package of Schrader, nor a restatement of purpose or principles. I think we just would disagree with that based on what I just read the other one, although it has elements of both. For Schrader, French filmmaker Robert Bresson is the inexhaustible fount. He's one of the three filmmakers, and I mentioned that before, one of his Man Sitting in a Room or Man at a Table films, which originated with Bresson's Diary of a Country Priest. That priest was a diarist, and his writings were reinforced with the words read aloud in voiceover. Schrader made Travis Bickle from Taxi Driver a diarist and specified the same kind of voiceover. In the card counter, okay, got that, we covered that. Oh, why does he play cards? There you go. To hold himself together. His memories of the time he spent in Abu Ghraib as a U.S. Army torturer himself make him not want to live. He explicitly recalls, all right, we talked about why he was looking for a reason to kill himself. They had the guy beat him up. He finds two not to kill himself. Linda, a kind poker tour bankroll rep with whom he falls in love, and Sheridan's Kirk. The son of a military, okay, we got that. The three characters in an odd trio, beautifully played. The exuberant Haddish underplays with brilliance, while Ty Sheridan as Kirk keeps him earnestly appealing in spite of his homicidal intentions. Okay, he talks about Willem Dafoe. It's not really about poker, the movie. That is underscored by the moment he decides to walk away. With the card counter, Schrader has a sub-theme he can toss off like a light cloak, and when he does, the movie swerves into a semi-surreal realm, not entirely unlike that of the climax of First Reformed, but then it swerved back into a variation on Bresson that constitutes one of the most brilliant shots of his career. He gave it a 4 out of 4. He liked it a lot.
What do the critics say about the walk through the lights? I mean, all that, when they finally held hands, they walked through that whole, did they talk about that scene at all?
No, not that I read like a handful of reviews. And I didn't see
There's
that.
some interesting.
Gary, it didn't quite fit.
About
No, at all. That's what I was wondering why I was
There's
there.
some interesting things about Abu Ghraib, where they said the harder, the less they got from a prisoner, the harder they fought against the prisoner.
Right, well, he said to him, what if he doesn't really know anything? And Willem Dafoe's character, remember what his answer was? They all say that.
Because if they don't really know anything, they can't get anything, and then they get worse and worse.
Right.
But when they showed what they did to those people, it's horrifying.
Right, and I think that was a big part of the point of the movie, why he wanted to make it.
I think he was mocking the United States with that poker player.
The USA guy?
dressed up like a
Who
USA
they said,
yeah,
ironically, was
totally.
from Ukraine.
Yeah, well, but I think it was a mock of the
He was
government
from
because of
Ukraine?
the torture.
The USA
Oh,
guy?
yeah.
Oh, I didn't get that.
Yeah, the guy who was the Slim Boy Fat or whatever his name was, Slim Boy Jim, whatever, Johnny Joe, whatever. He's the one who said, he's not really even American, he's from Ukraine.
And he also,
USA with all that stuff written all over.
Well, he loved America. Here he's making a fortune playing cards, right? How bad is that?
and he also mentioned that Abu Ghraib, Gordo gets out and,
Yes.
shows his mansion.
Right, good
And
point.
everybody else.
Thank you. I wanted to mention that. Good point, Mike.
Yeah,
Right.
Not only that.
Gordo did no time in prison. He's rich, and the other guys are in prison.
I
right?
remember.
I think
the-
that's
But
the
that
lesson
was
of
why-
torture,
That was why he
is that
was so angry.
the people
Yes.
who organize it.
That's right.
Nobody
don't
above
get
him
punished.
And that's why
suffered.
we have waterboarding.
Those were the fall guys.
Yeah,
Right.
only the people.
They
that
were the
was
fall guys
in
who
the
appeared in the
photo.
picture.
But they were
Now,
the ones
that's
we-
another thing I thought was incongruous with his character.
Right.
He liked being anonymous. Now, maybe he liked being anonymous in reaction to what happened, but he didn't seem like the type who'd want to pose for a picture while he's torturing a prisoner. That
Right.
didn't really seem in character.
I don't think he posed, they must have taken pictures.
No.
Well, he was hamming it up for the pictures. They showed those quick
Well, I thought
scenes.
it taught him a lesson not to pose, like, to be more anonymous.
That may be
you
the
know,
case, right? That-
Yeah, but
Or
talking,
not.
talking about that in the newscast, when Abu Ghraib came out, and it was in the news, this poor little lady soldier's got a dog leash on the one guy because they
Right.
don't like women. And someplace later on, I read, she went to jail and, all
That's
the
right.
commanding officers, you don't do that
They-
unless you're instructed to do
Right.
something like that.
Right.
And they,
got off.
No, we
They
didn't.
got off.
I think that was another
Yeah,
big point of why this was made, because about the injustice of because again, he has an affinity for the working class. And, Blue Collar was a great example of that. If you haven't seen it, it's like this. It's an interesting movie. I think I like that one slightly more, but it's not entirely likable. But it's a fascinating study of blue collar workers. They work in an auto plant in Detroit. But so here again, the worker bees who were actually doing the torture, sure, they get punished, but their bosses do not. And that was part of Blue Collar, was about a union thing and fighting against the powerful company and all.
And they had a picture down in Rumsfeld in this news thing.
Oh, yeah.
Interesting
Yes.
enough.
Yes.
I mean, it was not by accident.
No, that was not
No,
by
no,
accident at
no, it
all.
wasn't.
Yeah.
That's right.
But they
True.
stopped Abu Ghraib.
Yes, they did. But he wanted to, I think, show the effects were not just on the prisoners. It was the guards who were deeply affected as well. So, all right.
I find it odd that the movie was not liked that much, but yet that was the one that was chosen by the group, that
It's hard for me to predict what you guys are going to vote for. I thought that was an interesting
Did you
choice.
know what the movie was gonna be about when you voted?
Like, who's the one who suggested it? A couple-
Oh, Ben and Rebecca, who unfortunately could not be here, they had a comment. And I said, you guys may be glad you're not here. I don't know, right? So they authorized the torture. Yeah.
Was it joke or they had a better deal?
No, they had a commitment. They wanted to be here though.
Oh, okay, well.
And
wait till
so
I see
I'm gonna stop the recording, but till next time. Thank you.
it.